They always said you could hear the storms coming long before they touched the old Davis farmhouse, with thunder rolling in from the mountains like an omen, shaking loose windows and sending anxious animals into hiding. But Lucia had never heard a storm sound quite like this one. The sky was thick with bruised clouds, flashes of lightning streaking across the fields, and the wind howled through the half-rotted porch boards as if it was looking for something to claim. Lucia, 17, slim and strong in the way of farm kids who learned to rely on themselves, moved from window to window, latching them tight, double-checking the flickering lanterns as rain battered the shingles above. Her parents were gone, driven north to see a sick uncle with the promise of returning in 2 days. That left Lucia to tend the place alone. Not that she minded, not really. There was a certain pride in knowing she could handle things. Still, nights like this brought a kind of loneliness she felt in her bones, a deep hush broken only by the snap of wind against the ancient siding and the steady tick of the kitchen clock. She tried to keep her mind on her chores, but the storm made it impossible to settle. She almost missed it at first, a sound beneath the thunder, raw and broken. At first, Lucia thought it was just the wind rattling the barn doors. Then it came again, unmistakable, a desperate, strangled whinny, rising over the storm's fury. Lucia froze, heart kicking up in her chest. None of their animals were left out. She'd brought the chickens in, and the only horses, a pair of old geldings, were safely stabled on the other side of the barn. So what? The cry came again, piercing and wild. Without thinking, she grabbed her father's raincoat, shoving her arms through the sleeves as she ran for the back door. The wind nearly tore it from her grip, slamming rain sideways into her face. Her boots squelched through mud as she sprinted across the yard, dodging puddles she couldn't see, her flashlight beam jittering wildly. She reached the barn doors, nearly lost her balance, wrestling them open, and was immediately greeted by a wave of the warm, sweet scent of hay mixed with something sharper, blood, sweat, fear. She swung the light around, searching for the source of the noise. Her own horses snorted from their stalls, eyes wide, but they weren't the cause. Then she saw her, sprawled awkwardly in the straw, a creature so ghostly white she seemed to glow even in the half-dark, her sides heaving. A mare, big-boned and beautiful even in distress, her coat slick with rain and mud, tangled mane hiding her face. Lucia's breath caught as the flashlight revealed long, bloody gashes across her flank, as if something with claws had raked her. The mare struggled to rise, legs shaking, but collapsed again, letting out a weak, terrified whicker. Lucia's first instinct was fear. This horse was wild, hurt, and cornered, and she knew what cornered animals could do. But she also remembered, from the half-finished veterinary classes she'd loved and then lost because of money, how desperation could look like anger. She swallowed, forcing herself to move slowly, talking in low, steady tones, her voice shaking only a little. "Easy, girl. I'm not going to hurt you. It's okay. You're safe. I promise." The mare's eyes met hers, wide, ice blue, startlingly human in their clarity and panic. Something flickered there, some silent plea. Lucia set her flashlight on a hook, letting the soft lantern light fall over the stall, and crouched, making herself small, unthreatening. She pulled off her coat, folding it into a pad and edging closer, heart pounding in her ears. The mare snorted but didn't try to kick, didn't bite. She just watched, trembling. Lucia's hands moved by memory. She reached for an old rag, dipped it in water, wrung it out with shaking fingers. Gently, she pressed it to the worst of the cuts. The mare flinched but didn't lash out. Blood trickled, mixing with the rainwater. Lucia tried to remember her training. Stop the bleeding, check for deeper wounds, keep the animal warm. But she had no vet kit, just what she could cobble together from old supplies, iodine, some gauze, her own determination. She talked the whole time, words tumbling out in a nervous stream. Stories about her day, the way the corn was late this year, memories of the first horse she'd ever ridden. Her voice seemed to calm the mare more than anything else. "You made it through the storm," she murmured, brushing a lock of a tangled gray mane from the horse's face. "You're a tough one, aren't you?" Minutes stretched into an hour. Rain hammered on the roof. The wound stopped bleeding, at least enough that Lucia could wrap it. The mare's breathing slowed, though her ears still flicked at every new rumble of thunder. Lucia found herself captivated by her, by the sheer will it must have taken to survive, to drag herself through the storm and into this place, to trust a stranger's hands. It was as if the storm had delivered her, battered and bleeding, to Lucia's door for a reason. She found herself whispering, "You need a name, you know." The horse blinked as if she understood. Lucia smiled, a real trembling smile, despite the fear and the chill. "Estrella," she said softly, thinking of the way the mare's coat had seemed to shine in the lightning, a glimmer of hope in the darkness. "Star. That's who you are." As she sat back on her heels, exhaustion washed over her. The storm was still raging, but inside the barn, it felt oddly quiet, like the world had shrunk to the soft breath of a horse and a girl, both survivors in their own way. Lucia stroked Estrella's neck, feeling the tension ease beneath her palm. For the first time in a long time, Lucia didn't feel so alone. Little did she know, this night, this storm, would be the beginning of everything that would change. The storm had blown itself out by morning, leaving the air heavy and clean, the kind of cool that settled over the fields like a promise of new beginnings. Lucia didn't sleep that night, not really. She dozed off curled on a hay bale near Estrella, waking at every sound, every uneasy shift of hooves, every sigh from the barn rafters. The sky outside was streaked with the soft pink and gold of dawn by the time she finally stood, stretching stiff muscles and shaking out the worst of the straw from her hair. She took a moment just to look at Estrella in the early light. The mare's white coat shimmered, catching the first rays of the sun, while her mane, softer gray than Lucia had realized last night, drifted across her forehead like a faded veil. Those blue eyes followed every move Lucia made, unblinking but no longer panicked. It was as if the storm had left something behind, not just in the broken branches scattered across the yard, but in the hush between two survivors who found themselves sharing space, sharing breath. Lucia moved quietly, not wanting to spook her. She remembered the caution her instructors had hammered into her during those brief, beloved months in veterinary class. Approach from the side, keep your voice low, show your hands. She did all of that now, but there was something different in the way she moved, gentler, slower, as if she already understood that trust here was a living thing, fragile and easily broken. "Hey there, Estrella," she murmured, voice husky from sleep and worry. "We made it through the night, didn't we?" She reached for the cloth she'd left soaking in a bucket and wrung it out, careful not to let the water drip too loudly. Estrella watched, muscles tensing, but didn't shy away when Lucia stepped closer. Bit by bit, Lucia cleaned the mare's wounds, checking for new swelling or infection. The cuts were ugly, but not as deep as she'd feared. She worked quietly, whispering reassurances as she pressed a rag to the worst of them, changing the makeshift bandage she'd wrapped last night. The barn was still, the only sound the gentle snorts of the other horses in their stalls, curious but respectful, as if they understood the gravity of what was unfolding. A rooster crowed somewhere outside, defiant against the night's chaos. Estrella remained still, barely flinching at Lucia's touch. She seemed exhausted, but her breathing was steadier. Lucia felt a rush of relief, mixed with something else, something old and half-forgotten. The memory of what it felt like to help, to matter, to be needed. It had been a long time since she'd felt that way. Since she'd had to drop out of the veterinary program, she'd convinced herself it didn't matter, that the farm and family needed her more, that dreams were for people with money and time. But now, with Estrella's trembling flank beneath her hand, the old ache returned, a longing for something bigger than just getting by. When the work was done, Lucia fetched a bucket of water and some of the last sweet hay she'd set aside for special days. She set it within reach and stepped back, giving Estrella space. The mare eyed her, then the bucket, then, tentatively, took a sip. Lucia let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "You're going to be okay," she said softly. "I'll make sure of it." The words felt like a promise, binding in a way she hadn't expected. As the sun climbed higher, Lucia heard her phone buzzing from the kitchen. She hesitated, unwilling to leave Estrella alone, but the world was already stirring. She hurried inside, found several missed calls from her mother. Worry, as always, at the center of each voicemail. Lucia texted back a quick reassurance, deciding not to mention the horse, not yet. She needed time to figure out what to do. Breakfast was hurried, a piece of toast, barely buttered, eaten standing up while she checked on the other animals. All seemed well, but Lucia's mind kept drifting back to the barn. What if Estrella was gone when she returned? What if she'd misjudged her wounds, missed something critical? But when she slipped back into the barn, Estrella was there, waiting. She'd finished the hay, drunk most of the water. Lucia couldn't help but grin. "You've got spirit," she said, brushing her hand along Estrella's neck. "That's good. You're going to need it." For the rest of the day, Lucia moved between her chores in the barn, drawn back again and again by the silent presence of the mare. She tried calling the local animal rescue, but the line went to voicemail. The thought of calling a vet crossed her mind, but she remembered the cost. The way bills had piled up after her dad's last injury. For now, it was just the two of them, figuring it out together. Ice. That afternoon, Lucia settled herself on the barn floor with an old paperback and started to read aloud. She wasn't sure why, but the sound of her own voice seemed to settle both their nerves. Estrella watched her, head tilted, ears flicking at every new word. It became a kind of ritual, the telling of stories, the sharing of breath and quiet. Lucia talked about everything and nothing. The hard winter last year, her grandmother's stubbornness, the wild foxes that prowled the cornfields after dark. As dusk approached, Lucia realized she was no longer afraid. Not of the storm, not of the loneliness, not even of what tomorrow might bring. She felt connected in a way she hadn't in years. Estrella, for her part, had stopped trembling. She leaned into Lucia's touch, eyes half closed, trusting. Later, as Lucia brushed the mare's mane, she marveled at its silvery gray softness and the strange, bright intelligence in her eyes. "You really are a star," she whispered, remembering how Estrella had shone in the darkness, a beacon of hope when all seemed lost. "You're safe here, I promise." By nightfall, a silent understanding had grown between them. No words, just a shared sense of survival and a fragile, blooming trust. Lucia stayed with Estrella until the stars came out, and the only sounds were the soft night noises of the countryside. As she finally drifted off to sleep, curled on the barn floor, Lucia realized she hadn't felt this kind of hope in a long, long time. She didn't know it yet, but this bond would change everything. Word traveled in Crestfield faster than the river after a storm. By noon the next day, before Lucia had even worked up the nerve to call animal control, the whole town seemed to know something strange had blown in with the thunder. It started small, on a neighbor's truck, slowing just a little too long in front of the farmhouse, a pair of kids whispering as they rode their bikes past the barn. Lucia didn't think much of it at first. Folks in Crestfield always found ways to fill the silence with stories, especially when anything out of the ordinary happened. But there was an edge to the look she got, a hush in the air that made her skin prickle, like everyone was waiting for her to explain something she barely understood herself. That morning, Lucia went into town for supplies. The rain had finally stopped, leaving puddles everywhere and the gravel roads slick beneath her old sneakers. She pulled her hair into a messy ponytail, hoping she looked like she belonged. Just another farm girl running errands. Nothing to see here. But as soon as she walked into Miller's Market, she felt the weight of every eye turn in her direction. Mrs. Miller, usually all smiles and small talk, glanced up from the register, her face stiff. "Morning, Lucia," she said, her tone clipped. "Heard the storm gave you a rough night?" Lucia nodded, forcing a smile. "Yeah, lost a few branches. Nothing we can't handle." She grabbed a bag of oats, some antiseptic, a loaf of bread. When she set them on the counter, Mrs. Miller's eyes narrowed ever so slightly. "Oats, huh? You don't have any horses left, do you?" The question hung in the air, heavy and sharp. Lucia hesitated, debating whether to lie. One of the neighbor's animals wandered over during the storm. She said finally, "She's hurt. I'm just looking after her until animal control gets here." Mrs. Miller pursed her lips, rang up the bread and antiseptic, but pushed the bag of oats to the side. "Sorry, Lucia, we're all out of oats. Delivery's late this week." Her voice was flat, her smile gone. Lucia saw the half-full bag on the shelf behind her and knew it was a lie. But something in Mrs. Miller's eyes warned her not to push. She paid in silence, stomach twisting, and left the store. As a small knot of people watched from across the street, one of them, an older man with a shock of gray hair and a faded army jacket, caught her gaze. He spat into the dirt, shaking his head. Outside, Lucia tried to gather herself, the morning sunlight suddenly feeling colder than it should. As she crossed the street toward her bike, she heard her name. Lucia. The voice was familiar, low and hesitant. She turned and saw Mason, her childhood friend, older now, taller, face marked by the lines of someone who'd seen too much too soon. He shoved his hands deep in his pockets, glancing over his shoulder as he caught up to her. "Hey," he said, eyes darting. "You all right?" Lucia managed a thin smile. "Sure, just running errands." Mason glanced back at the market, his mouth twisting. People are talking. They say you've got a white mare in your barn. Someone saw her last night. Lucia bristled, then deflated. "Yeah, she showed up during the storm. She's hurt bad, Mason. I'm just trying to help." He nodded, chewing on his lip. "You know what they're saying, right? That she's Dr. Sloane's horse. The one that vanished when he disappeared last winter." Lucia's heart skipped. Dr. Sloane, the local vet who'd left under a cloud, whispered about in half-formed stories and angry mutterings at the feed store. She remembered his hard eyes and cold, careful hands from when she was little. "Why would his horse end up at our place?" Mason looked down, scuffing his boot in the mud. "Some folks say Sloane was into things he shouldn't have been. Fighting, breeding for speed, maybe more. He went off the rails after he lost his license. People think the mare is bad news, Luce. They're scared, and you know how they get when they were scared." Lucia wanted to laugh, wanted to say it was all nonsense, but there was a coil of worry in her chest. "She's just a horse, Mason, a scared, hurt horse. She needs help, not rumors." Mason studied her for a long moment, then reached out, squeezing her arm. "Just be careful, okay? And watch out for yourself. I know you, Lucia. You'll give everything to help something in trouble. Not everyone in this town is so kind." He glanced around, lowering his voice. "I heard my uncle talking last night. They're thinking about calling the sheriff. If they think you're hiding stolen property—" He didn't finish. Lucia swallowed, fighting the urge to cry or scream or both. She looked back toward the barn, picturing Estrella alone, trembling. "Thanks for the warning." She pedaled home fast, pushing against the wind. Every shadow on the roadside seemed deeper, every whisper in the breeze another accusation. Back at the farm, she ducked inside, double-checking the locks on the barn doors. Inside, Estrella greeted her with a soft nicker, head lifted. Lucia knelt by her side, brushing her neck. "Don't worry, girl. I won't let anything happen to you." But as she spoke, she realized she didn't know what would come next, or how she'd protect Estrella if the town turned against them. The hours passed in a tense hush. Lucia busied herself with chores, but her mind kept drifting back to town, to the sharp looks and sharper words. That afternoon, a battered pickup rolled up the driveway, parking at the end of the lane. Lucia watched from behind the curtains as two men climbed out. Neighbors she recognized, both with arms folded and faces hard as stone. They stood by the mailbox for a few minutes, talking in low voices, glancing towards the barn. Lucia's heart thudded so loudly she was sure they could hear it. Finally they left, but the fear didn't. That evening, as Lucia fed Estrella, she heard voices outside, two women passing on the road. She always was strange, that Lucia. And never fit in. Now she's hiding things. just like her grandmother used to with that Sloane fellow. The voices faded, leaving only the low hum of the coming night. Exhausted, Lucia slumped in the straw beside Estrella, running gentle fingers along her mane. "It's us against the world, huh?" The mare seemed to understand, pressing her muzzle to Lucia's shoulder. In that quiet moment, Lucia found a fragile comfort. They were both outsiders, both trying to heal. But as darkness gathered and the first stars pricked through the clouds, Lucia realized things had changed. The storm had brought more than a wounded horse to her door. It had brought the eyes and doubts of an entire town. And behind those doubts, there were secrets and shadows she hadn't begun to understand. For the first time, Lucia truly wondered what she'd gotten herself into. She made a silent promise to Estrella and to herself. She would fight for this bond, no matter what the world whispered. The next few days blurred together in a swirl of tension, routine, and worry. Lucia clung to her chores and the comfort of Estrella's presence, but a shadow seemed to follow her everywhere she went. Every time the phone rang, every knock at the door, her heart raced, afraid it might be someone from town, or worse, someone asking about the horse. Rumors had a way of growing in the silence of smaller places, and the more Lucia tried to keep her head down, the more conspicuous she felt. Her grandmother, Etta, had always said, "When the world's watching, keep your eyes open and your mouth shut." Etta had lived through worse storms than this, real ones, and the kind that came with people's opinions. She moved slower now, age and arthritis catching up with her, but she still ran the household with a quiet authority that Lucia respected. It was on a gray Saturday afternoon, with the wind still rattling loose window panes and the sky thick with the threat of more rain, that Etta called Lucia upstairs. "Could use a hand, honey," she said, voice echoing from the attic door. Lucia set down the laundry and climbed the creaking stairs. The attic was always a little eerie, full of old trunks, mothballed winter coats, and the heavy scent of cedar and dust. Shafts of pale light filtered through the single, grimy window. Etta was sorting through boxes, searching for a quilt she wanted to mend. Lucia joined her, grateful for the distraction. Together they sorted through stacks of faded photographs and battered children's books. As Lucia pushed aside a box marked Winter 1962, she noticed something tucked behind an old crate, a battered leather bag, the kind she remembered from her short-lived vet school days. Curiosity got the better of her. She pulled it out, brushing off a thick layer of dust. The latch was stiff, but inside she found what looked like a makeshift veterinary kit, rusty scissors, empty syringes, faded packets of antibiotics. Beneath them was a notebook, small, bound in cracked brown leather. A name was written inside the front cover in a sharp, angular hand. Dr. Malcolm Sloane. Lucia froze, the name sending a chill through her. She glanced at her grandmother, who had gone still, watching her with unreadable eyes. "Where did this come from?" Lucia asked softly. Etta sighed, lowering herself onto a wooden trunk. "That belonged to Sloane. Back when I worked at his clinic, before everything went sour, I meant to toss it, but I couldn't bring myself to do it." Lucia flipped through the first few pages. Clinical notes, written in a hurried script, dosages, wound assessments, sketches of horses, dogs, even the occasional wild animal. But as she read further, the tone shifted. Paragraphs written late at night, full of worry and frustration, mentions of experimental trials, of breeding for endurance and unapproved compounds. Lucia's fingers trembled. He was doing more than patching up animals. Etta nodded, her mouth a tight line. "I quit when I found out what he was really after. That's why I never let you take your horses to him, even after he opened his fancy new place. It didn't matter how many degrees he had. Sometimes you can see it in a man's eyes, what he's willing to do when nobody's looking." Lucia kept reading. There were references to a star project, and more chillingly, a list of side effects: neurological tremors, sudden aggression, loss of coordination. Some pages were written in code, others stained with what looked like coffee or blood. Then she found an entry dated the night of the big winter storm, months ago. Lost Estrella in the chaos, gate down, tracks lost in snow, risk of exposure high, animal may show symptoms, unpredictable, must recover or eliminate before someone talks. Lucia's heart hammered. He's talking about Estrella, she whispered. Etta nodded again, looking away. She was his prize? He bred her for strength, then pushed her too far. When things started going wrong, animals dying, others running wild, I walked away. That's when he lost his license, but he didn't stop, just went underground. The reality of it crashed over Lucia, the reason for the town's suspicion, the fear in their voices, the half-heard stories. This wasn't just about a lost horse, it was about what Sloane had done, and the possibility that his secrets might come to light. Lucia wondered what Estrella had endured to get to her barn that stormy night, and what dangers still followed her. She tucked the diary into her pocket, hands shaking. We can't let him find her, Grandma. If he knows she's here... Etta cut her off with a sharp look. I won't let him hurt you, or that animal. Not again. They spent the next hour sifting through the rest of the attic, Lucia's mind racing. She found more notes, some addressed to her grandmother, pleas from Sloane asking her to come back, to help with just one more procedure. Each letter was colder. More desperate. Etta had never answered. Back downstairs, Lucia hid the journal in her room. She checked on Estrella, who was resting in the barn, breathing easier, wounds slowly knitting. She stroked the mare's soft gray mane, whispering what she'd learned. He can't have you back. You're safe. I'll fight for you. I swear it. But anxiety gnawed at her. She realized she needed to be careful. Sloane was still out there, maybe watching, maybe planning. Lucia started locking the barn every night, setting up makeshift alarms using tin cans and string. She double-checked the fences, kept her eyes peeled for strangers on the road. The next day, a new rumor started. Lucia heard it in the bakery, where a group of women huddled over coffee, voices low. Sloane's coming back. Says he's got rights to that horse. Claims he's a changed man, but I don't buy it. That family's in for trouble. Lucia left before they could see her, heart pounding. At home, she reread Sloane's journal, searching for clues about what he might do next. Every page felt like a warning. Sloane wouldn't let go of Estrella easily. Lucia made copies of the most damning entries, hiding them in different places around the house. That night, she and Etta talked long into the darkness. They shared old stories, Etta's years at the clinic, the patients they'd tried to save, the mistakes they'd made. Lucia learned more about her grandmother than she's ever had before, about what it meant to stand up for what was right, even when the world turned against you. As she drifted to sleep, the storm outside had finally broken, replaced by a calm, gentle rain. Lucia knew the real storm was still coming, but this time, she wasn't alone. She had Estrella. She had her grandmother. And in the shadows of the attic, she had the truth. Sunlight crept over the horizon, painting the fields in pale gold as a gentle hush fell over the countryside. The storms had passed, leaving the earth washed clean, the kind of morning where every blade of grass seemed to glisten with possibility. Lucia rose early, the weight of worry heavy, but mingled now with hope. For days, she had watched Estrella closely, nursing wounds, tending to her every need, and keeping the mare's presence as secret as she could. Still, the world pressed in. Rumors in town, the threat of Dr. Sloane returning, her grandmother's anxious glances. But here, in the stillness of the barn, Lucia found her purpose. That week, Estrella grew stronger, her wounds healed with surprising speed, a testament to her resilience and perhaps something more, a spark of wild luck or fate. But Lucia noticed something else too. Estrella's appetite returned in force, and the mare's sides seemed to swell more each day. At first, Lucia thought it was just recovery weight, but a deeper instinct nagged at her. She remembered old lessons from vet class and from Etta, the way her grandmother had talked about the cycles of life on a farm, the signs, the patterns, the miracles that sometimes appeared when you least expected them. One evening, as Lucia brushed Estrella's mane beneath the fading light, she caught the mare shifting awkwardly, her belly round and taut. Lucia's breath caught. "No way," she murmured. She pressed a gentle hand to Estrella's side, feeling a faint, fluttering movement beneath her palm. New life, unmistakable and urgent. Estrella was pregnant, and close, far closer than Lucia would have dared imagine. Lucia raced back to the house, heart hammering. Etta looked up from her knitting, brows raised. "What's gotten into you, child?" "She's pregnant," Lucia gasped, voice trembling between awe and worry. "Estrella's going to have a foal soon. I can feel it." Etta's face softened, her hands stilling. For a moment, the lines of age faded, and she was the young nurse again, the woman who had once defied Dr. Sloan for the sake of suffering animals. "A foal," she repeated, almost reverent. "Well then, we'd better be ready." Together, they gathered what supplies they could. Fresh straw, clean towels, water, iodine, old blankets. Lucia read every book she could find, making frantic notes on her phone, preparing for complications, but hoping, praying, for a quiet birth. They moved Estrella to the cleanest stall, lining it with extra hay, and Lucia slept in the barn each night, unwilling to risk missing the moment. News, of course, was impossible to contain. The neighbors watched the farm with a new intensity, some curious, others fearful. The local postman dropped off mail and lingered too long by the gate. A group of teens took selfies near the fence, whispering about the ghost horse. Lucia ignored them all, focusing only on Estrella and the small life about to enter the world. On the fifth night, as the sun dipped below the trees and the world held its breath, Estrella grew restless. She circled her stall, nostrils flaring, eyes bright and anxious. Lucia crouched nearby, nerves jangling. She remembered Etta's stories of foalings that had gone wrong, of the line between life and loss in the hush before dawn. Etta joined her, bringing a thermos of strong tea, and together they waited, whispering comfort to Estrella and to each other. Hours passed. The barn was still, except for the mare's labored breathing. Then, with a suddenness that stole Lucia's breath, the birth began. Estrella lowered herself to the straw, muscles trembling, and Lucia moved to her side, stroking her neck, murmuring, "You can do this, girl. I'm right here." Just a little longer. Etta steadied her granddaughter's shaking hands, eyes sharp and focused. The labor was long, but Estrella was strong. Lucia watched in awe as, at last, a tiny shape slid into the world. A foal, slick with afterbirth, legs impossibly long and delicate. For a moment everything was still. Then Estrella nuzzled her baby, breathing life into fragile lungs. The foal coughed, then drew its first breath, a thin, wavering whinny echoing through the barn. Lucia wiped tears from her cheeks, laughing and crying all at once. "You did it! Estrella! Oh my God! You did it!" Etta squeezed her shoulder, pride shining in her eyes. As dawn crept over the fields, Lucia saw the foal in the clear morning light. A pale, shimmering coat, so light it seemed to glow, with a faint golden birthmark along its shoulder. It was beautiful, perfect, and unlike anything Lucia had ever seen. She thought of old stories, the kind her grandmother used to tell, about miracle animals, blessed by the stars. The foal's eyes opened, deep brown and trusting, and Lucia felt something shift inside her, a sense of hope so fierce it burned away every fear. She named him Saul, for the sun, for new beginnings, for the way his coat shimmered as if touched by light. Estrella and Sol, star and sun, a family born from the storm. Word of the birth spread quickly. Some neighbors watched from the road, their curiosity growing into awe or suspicion, depending on what stories they believed. By noon, Lucia found a note tucked under the mailbox. A blessing or curse. Some miracles come at a price. She crumpled it, refusing to let the fear creep in. Others were kinder. Mrs. Andrews, who ran the diner in town, brought over a basket of muffins and a note that simply said, "Congratulations, life always finds a way." A local pastor stopped by, offering to bless the animals, just in case. But not everyone was welcoming. Some whispered about curses and bad luck, about Dr. Sloane's experiments and the dangers of keeping something so unusual, like in plain sight. Lucia shielded Saul and Estrella as best she could, refusing to let outsiders define their fate. She spent every spare moment with them, learning the rhythms of their days. Saul's first wobbly steps, Estrella's fierce protectiveness, the quiet joy that came from witnessing something so rare. Etta watched with pride, her earlier fears softened by the sight of her granddaughter blooming with purpose. But the attention brought danger, too. Strangers drove by at night, shining flashlights into the fields. Lucia caught a group of kids sneaking around the barn, snapping pictures. She shooed them away, her voice trembling but firm. Rumors grew wilder. Some said the foal could heal sickness, others that looking at him brought bad luck. Some claimed Sloane had returned and was looking for his property. Lucia lay awake at night, the diary hidden beneath her pillow, praying for safety and for the strength to protect what mattered most. She knew trouble was coming, but for now, as Saul nursed beneath Estrella's watchful gaze, and the first wildflowers of spring bloomed in the fields, she allowed herself to believe in miracles. In the golden glow of the barn, Lucia whispered to Estrella and Saul, "You're both safe here. I promise as long as I'm breathing, I'll keep you free." Outside, the world waited. Inside, hope grew, quiet and unbreakable. Spring crept into the countryside, painting the fields in new shades of green and setting the orchards ablaze with blossom. For a brief stretch of days, Lucia let herself believe that miracles might last. She filled her time caring for Saul and Estrella, learning their quirks, memorizing every flick of an ear, every snort of surprise as the foal discovered the world with awkward, gangly joy. Etta watched from the porch, knitting in her lap, a look of satisfaction softening her sharp features. In those golden moments, it was almost possible to forget the rumors swirling outside the fence, the shadows that crept longer each night. But the world had a way of catching up, and the spell broke late one afternoon when a black car pulled up the dusty drive. Lucia was leading Saul around the paddock, encouraging him to step into the sunlight, when the sound of tires on gravel made her freeze. Estrella's head snapped up, nostrils flaring as the sleek sedan rolled to a stop. The car door opened and a man stepped out, his silhouette instantly familiar. A trim figure, dark suit, a cold smile that never reached his eyes. Dr. Malcolm Sloane had returned. He moved with the confidence of a man who believed the world still owed him something. Lucia felt a chill crawl up her spine. She put herself between the horses and the gate, squaring her shoulders as he approached. Etta appeared at her side, silent and unyielding. "Lucia," Sloane said, drawing out her name like an accusation and a compliment all at once. "What a pleasure to see you again." His eyes swept over the scene, lingering on Saul and Estrella with the calculated gaze of a man sizing up merchandise. Not living creatures. "You've done well. They both look healthy. Remarkable, considering the state I last saw her in," Lucia bristled. "They're not yours. You lost the right to them a long time ago." Sloane reached into his briefcase and produced a sheaf of papers, crisp and stamped with ominous red seals. "I'm afraid you're mistaken. Estrella is registered under my name, and her foal, by law, belongs to me as well. I have documentation to prove it. I'm here to collect what's mine." Etta stepped forward, eyes like steel. "You abandoned that animal, left her to die in a storm." He shrugged, his smile never wavering. "An unfortunate misunderstanding. I've been rehabilitated, as they say. New job, new standing in the community. The authorities cleared me of any wrongdoing." He tapped the documents with a manicured finger. "All perfectly legal." Lucia's hands balled into fists. "Legal doesn't mean right. You bred her for experiments, used drugs that hurt animals. I've read your journal." For the first time, a flicker of doubt crossed Sloane's face. He recovered quickly. "Young lady, you should be careful what you accuse people of. And what you do with property that doesn't belong to you. I'm willing to be generous. Give me Estrella and the foal, and I won't press charges. Otherwise, I'll have no choice but to take this to court, and we both know you can't afford that kind of fight." His words echoed in the heavy air. Lucia felt her resolve waver, the weight of the world pressing down on her. Sloane's return had always felt inevitable, a dark cloud on the horizon. Still, seeing him here, confident and armed with law and threat, made her knees shake. She glanced at Etta, who set her jaw and gave a tiny, imperceptible nod. They would not be bullied. "You'll have to go through us first," Etta said, her voice razor-sharp. Sloane straightened, lips thinning. I was hoping we could resolve this amicably. You have until the end of the week to reconsider. After that, I'll return. With the sheriff and animal control. I'll bring every legal resource I have." He turned, pausing to look over his shoulder. "Enjoy your time with them. It won't last." Lucia watched as the car vanished down the drive, her heart pounding so hard she felt sick. She hugged Estrella's neck, burying her face in the horse's mane to hide the tears threatening to spill. Sol pressed against her leg, trembling in confusion. Etta led her back inside, hands gentle but strong. "Let him try," she whispered fiercely. "We have the truth. And sometimes that's enough." But Lucia could see the worry etched in her grandmother's eyes. Sloane's threats were real, his money and connections formidable. Lucia spent the next hours pacing the kitchen, scanning Sloane's documents for loopholes, poring over his journal for evidence. The law was clear. Animals registered under Sloane's name could, in theory, be reclaimed, unless proof of abuse or neglect could be provided. Lucia gathered everything she could: photos of Estrella's injuries, journal pages, witness statements from neighbors who'd seen the horse's state when she arrived. She called the local animal rescue again, leaving urgent messages that went unanswered. Money was tight. Too tight for a lawyer, too tight to risk fines or court fees. The next few days passed in anxious limbo. The farm felt like a fortress under siege. Every sound set Lucia on edge. A truck on the road, a knock at the door. Townsfolk kept their distance, unsure which side to take. A few offered quiet support. Most pretended nothing was happening at all. Even Mason, her oldest friend, looked helpless when she explained the situation. "He's got connections, Luce. Real ones. But you're not alone. Whatever you need, I'll help." Lucia tried to sleep, but nightmares plagued her. Visions of Sloane leading Estrella and Sol away, the barn empty and silent, the world going on as if nothing had happened. She woke in a sweat, determined but afraid. Each morning she checked the locks, reinforced the fences, kept her phone charged and her evidence organized. One afternoon, Lucia found Etta at the kitchen table going through an old address book. "We need help, honey. Someone who'll take our case. Someone who believes in more than money." They started making calls to animal rights groups, to law students, to anyone who might know how to fight back. Most turned them away, but one, a woman named Grace Chin, listened. "I can't promise a win," Grace said, her voice steady on the other end of the line. "But I can promise to fight. Email me everything you have. We'll get started." That night, Lucia sat with Estrella and Sol in the barn, reading aloud from old storybooks to calm her nerves. She felt their warmth on either side of her, the simple comfort of their breath and the rhythm of their hearts. She remembered why she was fighting, not for pride, not even for justice, but for the lives that had come to depend on her. As rain started to fall again, softly this time, Lucia looked up at the leaky roof and made another silent promise. "No matter what it takes, I'll protect you. We're family now. He can't take that away." Outside, thunder rumbled, distant but moving closer. Sloane's shadow lingered on the edge of every light, but Lucia's resolve burned brighter. The real fight was just beginning. The days after Sloane's threat crawled by, each one heavier than the last. Lucia went through every moment with an edge of anxiety, every shadow outside the window, every unfamiliar car passing by the lane, made her heart seize. She found herself jumping at sudden noises, sleeping only in shallow, fretful spells. The barn, once her sanctuary, now felt both like a safe haven and a potential trap. But Estrella and Sol still needed her. The routines became a lifeline, Feedings, grooming, gentle walks around the paddock. Each sunrise brought a sliver of hope that maybe, just maybe, Sloan would give up. Yet Lucia knew better. Dr. Sloan was not the kind of man to back down, especially when his ego and reputation were at stake. She tried to keep up with Grace Chen, the lawyer who had agreed to help, exchanging emails and forwarding every scrap of evidence she could muster. Grace's messages were encouraging, but honest. "We're building a case, Lucia, but we need more. More witnesses, more public attention, something undeniable. If you can get anything on record, especially if Sloan tries anything underhanded, document everything." The advice felt like both shield and warning. On the fourth night after Sloan's visit, the storm clouds returned. Wind howled around the farmhouse, rattling the windows and setting the old roof to groaning. Lucia sat at the kitchen table, phone in hand, unable to sleep. Etta had dozed off in her rocker, a flashlight clutched in one hand, as if even in sleep she was guarding the home she'd built. Something moved outside. Lucia's head snapped up, pulse racing. She peered through the kitchen window, heart in her throat. A shadow was crossing the yard, moving low and quick, hugging the darkness along the fence line. Lucia squinted, her fear crystallizing into certainty. Sloan had come early. She grabbed her phone, her breath shallow. The lawyer's words echoed in her mind. "Document everything." Lucia turned on the video recorder, fingers trembling, and slipped out the back door, keeping to the shadows. Rain started to fall, thin and cold, tapping on the tin roof of the barn. Lucia heard the creak of the big doors. Someone was inside. She slid up alongside the wall, pressed flat, and peeked through a gap in the boards. Inside, under the dim yellow light of an old lantern, Sloan was there, crouched by Estrella's stall. His face was set in a grim, determined mask, jaw clenched tight. He fiddled with a thick rope and a syringe, muttering curses as Estrella, wild-eyed, tried to shield Saul behind her. Lucia's fear flared into anger. She hit record and pushed open the barn door. "Get away from them!" Sloan jerked upright, startled, but quickly recovered. "You don't belong here, Lucia!" he spat. "This is my property, and you're trespassing on my rights." Lucia held her phone steady, aiming it at his face. "You broke in. You brought drugs. This is trespassing and animal cruelty. The world's about to see what kind of man you really are." Sloan lunged at her, but Estrella reared up, her eyes blazing. She positioned herself between Saul and the intruder, muscles bunched in fury. Sloan, undeterred, swung the rope at her, trying to loop it around her neck. Estrella lashed out, hooves striking the air, snorting with rage. Sloan stumbled back, nearly tripping over the feed bucket. Lucia's hands shook as she continued to record. "Leave them alone. I'm live streaming this. People are watching now. If you hurt them, everyone will know." She tapped a button, sending the feed to her social media account. A handful of viewers joined instantly, the chat filling with shocked comments and urgent pleas for help. Sloan's face twisted in fury. He advanced again, raising the syringe. "You think anyone in this town cares what you say? They're mine, and I'll prove it." He never finished the sentence. Estrella charged, her body a blur of muscle and white fury. She struck out with her front hooves, connecting hard with Sloan's shoulder and sending him sprawling backward into a pile of feed sacks. The syringe flew from his hand, skittering across the floor. Saul let out a terrified whinny, pressing close to his mother. Sloan scrambled to his feet, clutching his arm. "You stupid animal!" he shouted, voice cracking with rage and pain. He lunged at Estrella again, fist raised, but Lucia threw herself between them, holding up her phone. "The police are coming. I've called them. Get out!" Sloan hesitated, face mottled with anger and humiliation. For a moment, Lucia thought he might strike her, but the headlights of a sheriff's cruiser cut through the rain outside, blue and red lights painting the barn walls in streaks of warning. Within seconds, Sheriff Morales strode in, hand on his holster, gaze sweeping the scene. "What's going on here?" he demanded. Lucia held out her phone, the video still rolling. He broke in. He tried to drug Estrella. "I have everything on camera." Sloan sputtered, switching tactics in an instant. "I was retrieving my property. She's been keeping them illegally. Ask anyone in town. They know she's unstable. Morales silenced him with a look, then turned to Lucia. Are you okay? She nodded, still trembling. I'm fine. Yeah, but he was going to hurt them. He said he'd take them away, no matter what. Morales looked from Lucia to the video, then to Sloan, who was massaging his shoulder, his confidence beginning to crack. We'll sort this out at the station. For now, Mr. Sloan, you're coming with me? Breaking and entering? Attempted animal cruelty? I'd say you have a lot to answer for. As the deputies led Sloan outside, Lucia slumped against Estrella, sobbing in relief. Etta appeared at the barn door, her face pale but fierce. She rushed to her granddaughter, gathering her into a hug. You did it, honey. You protected them, and now everyone will see the truth. The news spread as fast as the earlier rumors. Lucia's video went viral overnight, watched and shared by hundreds, then thousands, animal lovers, activists, and neighbors who'd once crossed the street now rallying to her side. Texts poured in from strangers offering support, donations, and legal help. Grace Chen called, voice brimming with hope. This is what we needed, Lucia. You gave us the proof. Now we have a real chance. The next morning, the sheriff himself came to the house. He apologized for ever doubting Lucia, promised that Estrella and Saul would be safe until the court hearing, and assigned deputies to patrol the farm at night. Lucia spent that day in a daze, overwhelmed by relief, gratitude, and exhaustion. She sat in the paddock with Estrella and Saul, watching the foal nuzzle his mother and feeling, for the first time since the storm, a glimmer of peace. The fight wasn't over, but the worst was past. She had stood her ground, and with Estrella by her side, had turned the tide. As dusk settled over the fields, Lucia whispered to the two horses, We're not alone anymore. Whatever happens next, we're stronger together. The wind answered, soft and warm, carrying hope across the quiet land. The storm had passed, but in its wake, something new and unexpected blossomed. Lucia woke to sunlight, filtering through her curtains and the soft, rhythmic clopping of Estrella and Saul pacing in the paddock. It almost felt like a dream. The chaos of the night before, the confrontation in the barn, Sloane's arrest, and the police lights flashing blue and red through the rain. But when she checked her phone, she knew it was real. Notifications were piling up, dozens every minute. Texts, calls, emails, comments from people she'd never met. Her live-streamed video had exploded overnight. The views were in the tens of thousands by morning, the comments a tidal wave of outrage, encouragement, and support. Animal rights groups were tagging her, local news anchors were leaving voicemails, and people from across the country were offering donations to cover legal fees or just sending words of hope. Lucia scrolled through the feed in disbelief. For so long she'd felt like it was her and Estrella against the world. Now, for the first time, it felt like maybe the world was on their side. The shift in town was immediate. The next time Lucia went into Miller's Market, Mrs. Miller greeted her with a wide, genuine smile, pressing a fresh bag of oats into her arms with a conspiratorial wink. On the house, honey. You're doing us proud. The other shoppers offered awkward but sincere congratulations. A few still gave her wary looks, but most seemed genuinely moved by what she'd done. As Lucia loaded her groceries into the truck, a group of local teens approached her, heads ducked, shuffling their feet. The same kids who'd once whispered rumors about the ghost horse now asked for a selfie, their eyes shining with admiration. Back at home, the support was even more tangible. Neighbors stopped by to drop off fresh hay, handmade banners reading, "We stand with Lucia," and casseroles in every variety, chicken, tuna, even a vegan option from Mrs. Andrews at the diner. Mason arrived one afternoon with a toolbox in hand and a determined set to his jaw. Thought I'd help fix up the barn doors, he said, and stayed all day working alongside Lucia as if nothing had ever come between them. Etta took it all in stride, her eyes glinting with pride as she watched her granddaughter grow into her own power. I always told you, people can surprise you, she said one night as they sat on the porch, sipping sweet tea and watching the sun set behind the paddock. When the truth finally comes out, it's like sunlight after a storm, folks see what's real. Yet the outpouring of support wasn't just from the familiar faces of Crestfield. Lucia began to notice new faces around town. Animal activists who'd driven hours to see Estrella and Saul, curious journalists with notebooks in hand, and, perhaps most touching, families with children who wanted to meet the horses whose story had inspired them. The local sheriff, who'd once dismissed Lucia's concerns, now stopped by daily, not just to check in, but to reassure her that she, and the horses, were protected. One afternoon, a group of former clients of Dr. Sloan organized a rally in the town square. They shared their own stories of animals hurt by his experiments, reading excerpts from the journal Lucia had uncovered and showing photos of their pets. It was a cathartic release for many, a chance to turn their pain into something that could spark change. Grace Chen, Lucia's lawyer, spoke to the crowd, urging the community to support stronger animal protection laws. Her words rang with conviction, but it was the crowd's cheers, loud, genuine, and united, that left Lucia blinking back tears. The most moving moment, though, came quietly. A woman Lucia didn't recognize appeared at the farm gate one morning, holding the hand of a young boy with wide, anxious eyes. "This is Owen," she said softly. He's autistic, and animals calm him. He hasn't spoken much since his father died, but we saw your video, and he wanted to meet the horses." Lucia nodded, leading them through the paddock. Owen approached Saul with slow, careful steps. Estrella watched, tense but trusting, as the boy reached out. Saul, curious and gentle, pressed his nose to Owen's palm. The boy's face lit up, and to everyone's surprise, including his mother's, he spoke. "Soft," he whispered, running his fingers through the foal's shimmering coat. His mother burst into tears, and Lucia knelt beside her, speechless at the quiet power these animals had to heal. Word spread quickly, and soon more families visited, each with their own story of hope and need. Lucia began to realize that what she'd started was bigger than just protecting Estrella and Saul. It was about offering sanctuary, hope, and healing to anyone who needed it. The community seemed to understand that too, rallying to her side as court day approached. Through all of this, Sloan's supporters grew quieter, their numbers dwindling as more evidence of his cruelty came to light. The sheriff's office released a statement confirming the investigation into his past abuses. Grace Chen built her case with newfound momentum, gathering testimony from rallygoers and compiling hundreds of supportive statements from people who had watched Lucia's video. Even the mayor reached out, promising to champion stricter animal welfare policies at the next council meeting. Yet there were moments of fear too. Late at night, Lucia sometimes caught herself listening for footsteps outside or worrying that Sloan might try something desperate. But every time those fears threatened to overwhelm her, she remembered the faces of the people who would come, the warmth of the community, the strength of Estrella at her side. She wasn't alone, and not anymore. Etta grew more animated, leading tours of the barn for children and reminiscing about her days at the old clinic. Lucia marveled at her grandmother's resilience. "You taught me how to fight for what's right," she told her one evening. "And you taught me when to ask for help." Etta only smiled, pressing a kiss to Lucia's hair. "You're the reason they're all here, honey. Don't forget that." As the hearing drew near, Lucia stood in the field one evening, watching Sol and Estrella graze under the setting sun. She reflected on everything that had happened, the pain and the hope, the fear and the faith. She realized that even in the darkest moments, a single act of courage could light the way for others. The community, once distant and suspicious, had become her family. Together, they'd stood up to a bully, shone a light on truth, and found something worth believing in. That night, as fireflies danced in the dusk, Lucia whispered to Estrella and Sol, "We're almost there. I promise I'll see this through. For you. For everyone." Estrella nickered softly, Sol pressed close, and Lucia felt hope rise up inside her, strong and steady as the dawn. The world beyond their fields was watching, and for the first time, Lucia was ready. The day of the hearing dawned clear and cool, the sky a pale blue canvas brushed with hope and tension. Lucia woke with a lump in her throat and adrenaline fizzing in her veins. She dressed with care, plain jeans, her nicest button-down shirt, and her grandmother's old necklace, a silver charm shaped like a star. Etta hugged her hard before they left, whispering, "I'm proud of you, no matter what." Mason showed up early, nerves jittering behind a supportive smile, insisting on driving them to the courthouse. Sol and Estrella watched from the paddock, Sol's golden birthmark catching the morning sun, as if offering a silent blessing. The courthouse in Crestfield was an unassuming red brick building that had seen decades of small-town disputes and family squabbles. But today, the parking lot overflowed. Reporters jostled for position, animal activists held homemade signs, and locals crowded the steps, curiosity and anticipation hanging in the air. Lucia felt their eyes on her as she walked inside, head high, Etta and Mason at her sides, Grace Chin waiting by the door with a thick folder of evidence pressed to her chest. Inside, the courtroom buzzed with whispers. Dr. Sloan sat at a polished oak table, surrounded by two lawyers in crisp suits. He looked every bit the part of the aggrieved professional, hair slicked back, suit perfectly pressed. But his eyes never rested, darting to Lucia, to the crowd, to the judge's empty bench. Lucia took her seat and tried to steady her shaking hands. The hearing began. Judge Halverson, an older woman with a reputation for fairness, called the room to order. She listened first to Sloane's lawyer, who spoke in smooth, practiced tones about ownership, legal rights, registration papers, and lost property. They painted a picture of a respected veterinarian, wronged by gossip and circumstance. Sloane sat stone-faced, never looking at Lucia directly. Then it was Grace's turn. She rose, voice steady and clear, presenting the evidence they'd gathered, photos of Estrella's wounds, the video of Sloane breaking into the barn, and the damning entries from his own journal. She called witnesses, neighbors who'd seen Estrella arrive battered and bleeding, Etta, who testified to Sloane's past practices, and a former employee from Sloane's old clinic who described the experiments and the fear that lingered long after. But it was Lucia's video, the live stream, that had captured Sloane's threats and Estrella's desperate defense. That changed the room. The judge watched in silence as the footage played, the raw fear and bravery echoing off the old courtroom walls. When it finished, the only sound was the shuffle of papers and the faint hum of the air conditioner. Sloane's lawyers tried to pivot. They argued that the video was misleading, that Estrella was a dangerous animal, that Lucia had interfered with private property. But the tide was turning. Grace pressed the advantage, reading aloud from Sloane's own journal, describing side effects, illegal drugs, and the frantic coded entries about recovering or eliminating Estrella. Then Grace asked Lucia to take the stand. Lucia's heart hammered in her chest as she rose. The judge smiled reassuringly. Lucia met her gaze, then the faces of the crowd. Etta, Mason, the animal activists, and the townsfolk who'd once doubted her. She took a shaky breath and began. At first, I was just trying to save a life. Estrella came to me in a storm, hurt, scared, left for dead. I couldn't turn her away. I remembered what my grandmother taught me. What I'd learned in the little time I spent in vet school, that every life matters. At first, it was just about patching her up, giving her a safe place. But I learned that helping one animal or one person can have ripples you never expect. She paused, swallowing hard as emotion threatened to choke her. Estrella isn't just property. She's a survivor. She protected her foal, Saul, the same way I tried to protect them. And in doing that, she helped me. She gave me purpose again. When I felt like I'd lost everything, what Dr. Sloan did to her wasn't medicine. It was cruelty. But she survived. She healed. And she brought this whole community together, showed us what courage looks like. Silent, stubborn, and full of grace. She looked directly at Sloan for the first time, her voice steady. You can't own a soul. You can't own hope. All you can do is try to do better, to fight for the voiceless. That's what I'm asking for today. Not just for Estrella and Saul, but for every animal, every person who's ever been told they don't matter. A hush settled over the courtroom. The judge nodded thoughtfully, then called for a brief recess. Outside in the hallway, Lucia found herself enveloped by supporters. The woman whose autistic son had visited the farm hugged her tightly, whispering thanks. Reporters jostled for quotes, but Lucia barely heard them. Mason squeezed her hand. Etta dabbed at her eyes, and Grace simply smiled, her own eyes shining with pride. When they returned, Judge Halverson spoke at length, her voice firm and compassionate. She recounted the evidence, the video, the journal, the testimonies. It's clear, she concluded, that Dr. Sloane's claim of ownership is undermined not only by his abandonment of Estrella, but also by the documented abuse in illegal experimentation. The evidence demonstrates a pattern of cruelty and disregard for animal welfare that cannot be ignored. She looked at Lucia, then at Sloane. In light of these facts, I am revoking Dr. Sloane's rights to Estrella and her foal, Sol. Further, I am referring Dr. Sloane's past conduct to state authorities for investigation and possible charges. Estrella and Sol are hereby awarded permanent protection under Lucia Davis, who has demonstrated extraordinary compassion and responsibility as their caretaker. This court recognizes her as their legal guardian under the state's animal rescue provisions. A collective gasp and then a cheer rippled through the room. Sloane slumped in his chair, face ashen, while Lucia hugged Etta and Mason, tears streaming down her face. Grace pressed the official documents into her hand, whispering, "You did it. You truly did it." As the courthouse emptied, Lucia stood outside with Sol and Estrella, brought out for the occasion, both of them symbols of hope and resilience. Reporters snapped photos as Estrella nuzzled Lucia's cheek and Sol danced in the sunshine. The sheriff shook Lucia's hand, promising that the farm would remain protected. One by one, people offered their congratulations. The mayor announced a new initiative to promote animal welfare, inspired by Lucia's story. The animal activists invited her to speak at their next rally. The woman whose son had connected with Sol pressed a thank you note into Lucia's hand, tears shining in her eyes. As the crowd began to thin, Lucia turned to Grace, Etta, and Mason. "I don't know what happens next," she admitted, voice raw with emotion, "but I know we did something good. We saved them, and maybe in some way, they saved us too." Etta squeezed her hand. "That's what family does, honey. We save each other." And as Lucia led Estrella and Sol back to the truck, the whole town watching, she realized that sometimes justice came not with vengeance, but with community, compassion, and the courage to do what was right, even when it seemed impossible. A year slipped quietly by after the court's decision, yet nothing about Lucia's life felt ordinary anymore. The pain and fear of that long, storm-filled spring had faded, replaced by days rich with laughter, learning, and the steady heartbeat of purpose. The little farmhouse at the edge of Crestfield had transformed. Where weeds once grew and paint flaked from the old barn, there now stood a shining sign at the driveway entrance, Estrella's Light Sanctuary. Word of what Lucia had done, how she'd saved Estrella and Sol, how she'd faced down Sloane and inspired a town, had spread far beyond county lines. She received letters from people across the country, struggling farm kids, animal rescuers, students, and even teachers who'd followed her journey online. Some wanted advice on how to help, some wanted to visit, and others just wanted to say, "Thank you." The sanctuary's mailbox overflowed with handmade drawings from children, crayon suns and stars, horses with golden marks on their shoulders, and messages that read, "Be brave, like Estrella." Every morning Lucia woke to the sounds of life. Sol's whinny ringing bright through the dawn, Estrella's gentle nicker as she greeted her foal, the laughter of volunteers and the chatter of new arrivals. They'd started small. Estrella and Sol were joined by a rescued goat, a trio of hens, then a dog with a scarred muzzle, and a heart as big as the prairie sky. The sanctuary became a refuge, not just for animals, but for people, too. Kids from the local school came for field trips. Teens volunteered on weekends, learning how to muck stalls, mend fences, and most importantly, show patience and kindness. Etta, too, found new purpose in the sanctuary. Her arthritis slowed her, but not her spirit. She became the resident storyteller, gathering children in the shade of the big maple tree and weaving tales about all the creatures she'd known, always ending with Estrella's escape and the miracle of Saul. Parents and teachers often lingered, drawn in by Etta's warmth and wisdom, as well as the message at the heart of every story. Sometimes you find your family in the most unexpected places. Grace Chen, now a close friend, helped Lucia organize community events, open barn days, animal care workshops, and talks at local schools about compassion, responsibility, and standing up for what's right. The mayor declared the sanctuary a pillar of hope at the annual Harvest Festival, and the sheriff's department partnered with Lucia to offer youth programs, encouraging empathy and respect for all living things. But for Lucia, the sanctuary's real heart always pulsed in the quiet moments, the ones nobody saw. Late at night, when the farm slept and the fields shimmered under moonlight, Lucia walked among the animals, checking locks, whispering goodnight, and letting the peace settle in her bones. Sometimes she'd pause beside Estrella and Saul, stroking their silky manes, marveling at how far they'd come. She knew their journey hadn't been easy. Both bore scars, reminders of hardship and survival, but those scars had become stories, proof of what love and stubborn hope could achieve. The town changed, too. Where suspicion and gossip once ruled, neighbors now brought fresh hay, blankets, and warm loaves of bread to share. The grocery store donated leftover produce, and the diner held monthly fundraisers for the sanctuary. Lucia's old classmates, some who'd mocked her for caring too much, now brought their own children to visit. The woman with the autistic son became a regular volunteer, helping with feeding and finding new ways to connect kids with the animals. Even Mason, who'd stood by Lucia when no one else did, became a fixture at the sanctuary, teaching others how to repair fences and build trust, one small act at a time. Saul, now strong and tall, became the farm's gentle ambassador. He'd nuzzle anyone brave enough to enter his paddock, especially children and those who seemed sad or shy. Estrella watched over him always, never straying far, her blue eyes calm and wise. Lucia loved to sit and watch them in the evening light, feeling the quiet magic of their bond. Sometimes, Lucia was invited to speak at conferences and schools. She always felt nervous at first, standing in front of crowds much larger than the town hall or church groups she was used to. But when she told Estrella's story, how a wounded, frightened mare had shown up on a stormy night and changed her life, she saw faces light up with understanding. She talked about second chances, about listening even when you were scared, about standing up for those who couldn't speak. The greatest things I've learned, she'd say, came from animals: trust, forgiveness, and the courage to try again, even when it hurts. Lucia never forgot how close she'd come to losing it all. She kept Sloane's journal locked away, a reminder of darkness, but also of resilience. And whenever she doubted herself, she'd read the last entry in her own diary, the words she'd written after the court victory. Sometimes, the ones who save you don't speak your language. They just trust you to do better. I owe it to them, and to myself, to keep going. One golden afternoon, as she led a group of children through the sanctuary, a little girl tugged her sleeve. "Ms. Lucia, how do you know when you've done the right thing?" Lucia knelt beside her, smiling. "I think it feels like this," she said, gesturing to the sun-dappled paddock, the laughter in the air, the sound of Estrella's soft nicker. "It feels like hope, like something bright and gentle, even after a long, hard storm." Later, as twilight settled over the fields, Lucia sat on the porch with Etta, Mason, and a few close friends. Estrella grazed nearby, Saul chasing fireflies across the grass. The world felt wide and safe, and Lucia found herself reflecting on the year's journey, the fear, the heartbreak, the unexpected kindness. "Do you ever wonder why it had to be so hard?" Mason asked quietly, looking out at the horses. Etta answered before Lucia could. "Because sometimes the hardest roads lead you right where you belong." Lucia nodded, watching as Saul galloped in circles, Estrella close behind. "If I hadn't been alone that night, if I hadn't lost my place at school, if the storm hadn't brought Estrella here, none of this would have happened. We found each other because we needed each other. A gentle breeze stirred, carrying the scent of wildflowers and fresh grass. Lucia closed her eyes, breathing it in, letting gratitude and wonder fill her chest. As the first stars appeared, Lucia stood, walking to the fence where Estrella watched the horizon. She rested her hand on the mare's neck, feeling the steady pulse of life, the promise of tomorrow. She spoke softly, words meant for the two of them and anyone who needed them. No matter how dark it gets, you just keep moving toward the light. That's what you taught me. Estrella pressed her nose to Lucia's shoulder, as if in agreement. And in that quiet, golden hour, surrounded by family, chosen and found, Lucia understood that Estrella's light would live on. In every life they touched, in every heart healed, in every second chance granted, the sanctuary was more than a safe place for animals. It was a beacon, shining through the darkness, a promise that kindness, courage, and hope could change the world. One soul, one storm, one miracle at a time.